The rain hammered against the pavement outside the military base entrance, creating puddles that reflected the gray morning sky. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell pulled her coat tighter around her civilian clothes as she approached the main gate. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she carried only a small briefcase and a worn duffel bag. Nothing about her appearance suggested the significance of her arrival at Naval Base San Diego. Sarah had spent the last 3 months in Washington attending classified briefings and strategic meetings. The promotion had come suddenly, announced quietly in closed-door sessions that few people knew about. At 38 years old, she was about to become one of the youngest admirals in naval history. The official ceremony wasn't scheduled until next week, but she had arrived early to observe the base operations without the fanfare and formality that would soon surround her every move. The guard at the gate barely glanced at her identification before waving her through. Sarah appreciated the anonymity. She wanted to see how things really worked here, to understand the daily challenges her sailors faced without everyone standing at attention and putting on their best behavior. Her philosophy had always been simple. A good leader knows what happens when nobody thinks they're watching. The base was massive, sprawling across hundreds of acres with buildings that ranged from modern glass structures to weathered World War II-era warehouses. Sarah had studied every map and report, but seeing it in person was different. She could hear the distant sounds of training exercises, smell the salt air mixed with diesel fuel, and feel the energy of thousands of personnel going about their duties. She decided to walk rather than request transportation. Her low-profile outfit, a simple navy blue coat over casual pants and a white shirt, helped her blend in with civilian contractors and off-duty personnel. Sarah had learned long ago that the best intelligence came from observation, not briefings. She wanted to see the dining facilities, the barracks, the maintenance yards, all the places where the real work happened. As she walked past a row of administrative buildings, Sarah noticed a young sailor struggling with an overloaded cart of supplies. The boxes were stacked precariously, and the sailor, who couldn't have been more than 20 years old, was trying to navigate around a corner without losing his cargo. "Need a hand?" Sarah asked, setting down her bags. The young man looked surprised but grateful. "Thank you, ma'am. These supply runs are always a challenge." Together, they steadied the cart and redistributed the weight. Sarah asked him about his duties, how long he'd been stationed here, what he thought of the base leadership. The sailor answered honestly, clearly not recognizing her, sharing small frustrations about equipment delays and complicated requisition procedures. Sarah made mental notes. These were the kinds of details that never made it into official reports. After helping the sailor reach his destination, Sarah continued her tour. She observed a training session where instructors worked with new recruits on damage control procedures. She watched maintenance crews servicing aircraft on the flight line. She stopped by the base exchange and listened to conversations about everything from family troubles to career concerns. Every interaction gave her valuable insights into the morale and efficiency of the base. By mid-morning, Sarah found herself near the main administration complex, an imposing structure of concrete and glass that housed the base command offices. This would soon be her workspace, her center of operations. She stood outside for a moment, studying the building, thinking about the responsibility she was about to assume. Thousands of lives would depend on her decisions. Families would be affected by her policies. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like the heavy rain that continued to fall. She was so lost in thought that she didn't immediately notice the commotion developing near the building's side entrance. Raised voices cut through the sound of rain, sharp and aggressive. Sarah's military instincts kicked in immediately. She moved toward the sound, her pace quick but controlled. Near a service entrance, she saw 3 people locked in what appeared to be a heated confrontation. A young female petty officer, her uniform soaked from the rain, was backing away from 2 men. One was clearly a sergeant, his stripes visible on his wet uniform. The other appeared to be a civilian, possibly a contractor. The sergeant was red-faced and shouting, his finger jabbing toward the young woman. "I don't care what your orders say," the sergeant bellowed. "This entrance is restricted during morning operations. You should know that." The petty officer, who looked to be in her early 20s, tried to explain. "Sergeant, I was specifically told to deliver these documents to the Admiral's office before noon. The main entrance is blocked due to the ceremony preparations, and the duty officer directed me to use this entrance. The sergeant stepped closer, his posture aggressive. Are you arguing with me, petty officer? Because it sounds like you're arguing with me. The civilian contractor shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to distance himself from the situation but uncertain whether he should intervene. Sarah assessed the scene quickly. The sergeant was overstepping his authority, using intimidation instead of proper procedure. The petty officer was following orders but being bullied for it. This was exactly the kind of leadership failure that could poison an entire command climate. Sarah approached steadily, her voice calm but carrying authority. Is there a problem here? The sergeant whirled around, his anger finding a new target. He looked Sarah up and down, seeing only a woman in civilian clothes, wet from the rain, with no visible rank or identification. His expression twisted into contempt. This doesn't concern you, lady. This is military business. Move along. Sarah remained still, her expression neutral. I can see it's military business. That's why I'm asking what the problem is. The young petty officer looked at Sarah with desperate hope, clearly grateful that someone was paying attention to her situation. The sergeant, however, took a threatening step towards Sarah. Listen, I don't know who you think you are, but you need to leave this area immediately. This is a restricted zone, and you're interfering with my duties. Sarah could have ended it right there by revealing her identity, but something made her pause. She wanted to see how far this would go, how this sergeant truly behaved when he thought no one important was watching. It would tell her everything she needed to know about the leadership culture on this base. The petty officer says she has orders to make a delivery, Sarah said evenly. Have you verified her orders? Have you contacted the duty officer she mentioned? The sergeant's face grew even redder. I don't need to verify anything. I know the rules, and she's breaking them. He turned back to the petty officer. Give me those documents. I'll make sure they get where they're supposed to go. You get back to your assigned area before I write you up for insubordination. The young woman hesitated, clutching the sealed envelope to her chest. Sergeant, I was told to hand-deliver these personally. I can't just give them to someone else. What happened next occurred so quickly that the civilian contractor actually gasped. The sergeant lunged forward and grabbed the envelope from the petty officer's hands, jerking it so hard that she stumbled. Then he rounded on Sarah, who had moved to help steady the young woman. And you, he snarled at Sarah. I told you to move along. He placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder and shoved her roughly backward. Sarah, trained in self-defense and with years of experience in difficult situations, could have easily countered the move. Instead, she let herself be pushed back a step, her eyes locked on the sergeant's face, memorizing every detail of this moment. The petty officer looked horrified. Sergeant, you can't just push civilians. The sergeant ignored her, tearing open the envelope despite the petty officer's protests. His hands fumbled with the wet paper inside, pulling out what appeared to be official orders and correspondence. Sarah watched as his eyes scanned the documents, seeing the exact moment when recognition began to dawn. The papers were addressed to the incoming base commander, materials related to next week's change of command ceremony. But it was the name on the orders that made the sergeant's hands start to shake. Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell, the very same name that was printed on the identification badge clipped inside Sarah's coat, currently hidden from view. The sergeant's eyes went wide. He looked up from the papers to Sarah's face, then back down to the documents. His mouth opened and closed several times without sound. The color drained from his face so quickly that he looked like he might faint. These are addressed to Rear Admiral Mitchell, he whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse. Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out her identification, holding it up so he could see clearly. That would be me, Sergeant. The change in the sergeant was immediate and total. He snapped to attention so fast that he nearly dropped the papers, his entire body rigid with military precision. The civilian contractor took several quick steps backward, clearly wanting no part of what was about to unfold. The petty officer's eyes went wide with shock and something that looked like satisfaction. Ma'am, you weren't. The uniform, the sergeant stammered, his face now pale as paper. Sarah let the silence stretch out, watching him sweat despite the cool rain. She took the documents from his trembling hands, checking them carefully for damage. They were wet, but intact. She turned to the petty officer. "You did the right thing following your orders, petty officer. What's your name?" The young woman straightened. "Petty Officer Second Class Jennifer Hayes, ma'am." "Well done, Petty Officer Hayes. Please continue to the Admiral's office and deliver these as instructed. Use this entrance as you were directed." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Hayes hurried past them into the building, shooting one last glance at the sergeant who had made her morning miserable. Sarah turned her full attention to the sergeant, who looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. She took in his name tag, Sergeant Marcus Rivera, 15 years of service based on his ribbons. "Sergeant Rivera," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of command. "Do you understand what just happened here?" Rivera's voice cracked as he responded. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize. I had no idea who you were. If I had known—" Sarah held up a hand, cutting him off. "Stop right there, Sergeant. That's exactly the problem. Your behavior shouldn't change based on who you think you're dealing with. That petty officer deserved the same respect you would show me. That civilian," she gestured to the contractor who was trying to edge away, "deserved courtesy and professionalism. The fact that you physically assaulted someone you perceived as powerless tells me everything I need to know about your leadership style." The rain continued to pour as Sarah's words hung in the air. The sergeant looked like he might be sick. The civilian contractor had finally managed to escape, hurrying around the corner. Other personnel were beginning to notice the confrontation, though they kept their distance. "Sergeant, you grabbed official documents from a subordinate who was following direct orders. You opened sealed correspondence without authority. You used physical force against 2 people. Any one of those actions could end your career. Combined, they paint a picture of someone who has forgotten what military service is supposed to be about." Rivera's shoulders slumped. 15 years of service, and he could see it all crashing down in this single rainy morning. "Ma'am, there's no excuse for my behavior. I was wrong." Sarah studied him carefully. She could destroy his career with a single report. Part of her wanted to, because leaders who abused their authority were a cancer in any organization. But she also believed in redemption, in the possibility that people could learn from their mistakes if given the chance. "You're right, Sergeant. There is no excuse. But I'm going to give you an opportunity. Report to my office at 1400 hours next Wednesday. Come prepared to explain to me how you plan to change your leadership approach. Bring documentation of every complaint filed against you in the past 5 years and a written plan for how you will rebuild trust with your subordinates. If I'm satisfied with what you present, you'll have a chance to prove you can be better. If not, I'll recommend your immediate transfer off this base with a formal reprimand in your record. Am I clear?" Rivera snapped another salute, his hand trembling. "Crystal clear, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity, ma'am." "Dismissed, Sergeant." Rivera turned and walked away, his steps unsteady, his whole world clearly shaken. Sarah watched him go, then picked up her bags and continued toward the building entrance. She needed to dry off and find the temporary office they had prepared for her. As she walked through the corridors, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. This incident with Sergeant Rivera was likely just the tip of the iceberg. If this kind of behavior was tolerated or overlooked, there would be more examples throughout the base. Her job in the coming weeks would be to identify these problems and root them out while supporting the good people who were doing their jobs correctly. The temporary office was small but functional, with a desk, computer, and a view of the rain-soaked base. Sarah set down her bags and pulled out her laptop, making notes about everything she had observed during her morning walk. The supply chain issues mentioned by the young sailor, the effective training she had witnessed, the positive conversations at the exchange, and, of course, the confrontation with Sergeant Rivera. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A lieutenant commander she didn't recognize entered and saluted. "Admiral Mitchell, I'm Lieutenant Commander James Park, your temporary aide until your permanent staff arrives next week. I heard you had an interesting morning." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Word travels fast." Park smiled slightly. "This is a naval base, ma'am. 3 people probably filmed that confrontation on their phones. And it's already circulating through unofficial channels. The entire base will know by lunchtime that the new admiral went undercover and caught Sergeant Rivera abusing his authority. Sarah sighed. So much for her quiet observation period. I wasn't trying to go undercover. I just wanted to see the base without the formality. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? Always, Commander. The personnel are already talking about it in positive terms. They're saying the new admiral is the kind of leader who doesn't tolerate bullies, who treats subordinates with respect, who keeps her word even when someone doesn't know who she is. That's exactly the kind of reputation you want when you take command. Sarah considered his words. Maybe the anonymity had been compromised, but perhaps the message was what mattered. She had demonstrated her values through actions, not speeches or official policies. The sailors would know what she stood for before she ever gave her first formal address. What else should I know, Commander Park? Park pulled out a tablet and brought up several reports. Sergeant Rivera isn't the only problem. There have been complaints about leadership climate in 3 different divisions. Morale is generally good, but there are pockets of concern. Equipment maintenance has been falling behind schedule due to supply chain issues that nobody seems able to solve. And there's tension between some of the senior officers about the direction of training protocols. Sarah listened carefully, asking questions, drilling down into the details. This was the real work of command, understanding the complex web of issues that affected operations. The morning's confrontation had been dramatic, but these systemic problems would require sustained attention and careful strategy to resolve. As the rain finally began to ease outside her window, Sarah felt the full weight of what she was about to undertake. Leading a major naval base involved thousands of decisions, each one affecting real people with real lives. The encounter with Sergeant Rivera had reminded her why she had dedicated her life to military service, to create organizations where people were treated with dignity, where justice mattered, where doing the right thing was more important than protecting egos or maintaining comfortable hierarchies. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the base commander she was replacing, Admiral Thomas Brennan. Heard about your adventure this morning. Welcome to San Diego. Let's talk strategy over dinner tonight. Sarah smiled and typed a reply confirming the meeting. Admiral Brennan had served with distinction for 3 decades, and she valued his perspective. But she was also ready to bring her own vision to this command, to make the changes necessary to transform this base into an example of excellence. The morning had been unexpected, even chaotic. But as Sarah looked out at the base, watching personnel hurrying between buildings now that the rain had stopped, she felt a sense of purpose settle over her. This was where she needed to be. These were the people she was meant to serve and lead. Sergeant Rivera had learned a hard lesson today. Sarah suspected he wouldn't be the last person on this base to discover that the new admiral was serious about accountability, respect, and doing what was right regardless of rank or position. The real question was whether he would rise to the challenge she had offered him, or whether his old habits were too ingrained to change. Only time would tell. But Sarah was prepared for whatever came next, armed with the conviction that strong leadership meant standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, maintaining standards even when it was uncomfortable, and never forgetting that every person in uniform deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. The rain had stopped completely now, and afternoon sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. Sarah turned back to her computer and continued making notes, planning her strategy for the weeks ahead. The official change of command ceremony would be impressive, with speeches and traditions and formal military pageantry. But the real change had already begun this morning in a rainy confrontation outside a side entrance, when a sergeant learned that true authority comes not from rank or intimidation, but from integrity and respect for every person under your command. The news of what happened outside the administration building spread across Naval Base San Diego faster than wildfire. By the time Sarah sat down for dinner with Admiral Brennan that evening, her phone had received 23 messages from various officers expressing welcome, support, or asking for clarification about the incident. She had responded to none of them yet, preferring to get the full picture from the man she was replacing before making any official statements. Admiral Thomas Brennan was 62 years old with silver hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades at sea. He met Sarah at a quiet restaurant off base, away from curious eyes and official protocols. They sat at a corner table where they could talk freely. You certainly know how to make an entrance, Brennan said with a slight smile after they had ordered. In my 30 years of service, I don't think I've ever seen a new commander create such a buzz before even taking official command. Sarah sipped her water. It wasn't intentional. I just wanted to observe the base without everyone performing for the brass. And instead, you uncovered one of our ongoing problems. Brennan's smile faded. Sergeant Rivera has been on my radar for 2 years. Multiple complaints, all documented, all investigated, but he's careful. He targets people who are afraid to push the issue. He backs off when anyone with authority notices. This morning was the first time anyone actually caught him in the act. Sarah leaned forward. Why is he still here? With 2 years of complaints, there should have been action taken. Brennan sighed heavily. That's the complicated part. Rivera is exceptionally good at his primary job. His unit has the highest efficiency ratings on the base. His maintenance records are spotless. His immediate superior, Commander Peterson, has protected him because, on paper, Rivera makes Peterson look good. I've tried to build a case, but without direct evidence of misconduct, my hands were tied. You're telling me that someone can abuse subordinates as long as they file good paperwork? Sarah couldn't keep the edge out of her voice. I'm telling you that bureaucracy protects people who know how to work the system, Brennan replied. Commander Peterson has been here for 8 years. He has connections in Washington. When I tried to move against Rivera last year, I got a call from a 2-star Admiral suggesting I focus on more important matters. That's the environment you're walking into, Sarah. There are power structures here that go beyond the official chain of command. Sarah absorbed this information, her mind already working through the implications. Tell me about Commander Peterson. Brennan pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photo. Commander Aaron Peterson was in his mid-40s, fit, with sharp features and a confident smile. Peterson is intelligent, politically savvy, and ambitious. He came up through the ranks by always delivering results and never making waves. He protects people like Rivera because they make him look good. He's also very careful never to leave fingerprints on anything questionable. What's his position on base? He runs logistics and supply operations, which means he controls the flow of resources, equipment, and materials. It's one of the most powerful positions on the base, and Peterson knows it. People depend on him to get things done, so they overlook his management style. Sarah thought back to the young sailor she had helped that morning, the one who complained about supply chain issues and complicated requisition procedures. Is Peterson the reason supplies are being delayed? Brennan raised his eyebrows. You've been here less than a day and you've already identified that pattern? Yes, I believe Peterson deliberately creates bottlenecks to increase his own importance. If people have to come to him personally to get things moving, it gives him power. But again, proving that he's deliberately sabotaging efficiency versus just dealing with genuine supply chain challenges is nearly impossible. The food arrived, but Sarah barely noticed. Her mind was racing through scenarios and strategies. What about his superior officer? Who does Peterson report to? That would be Captain Michelle Rodriguez. She's solid, fair, and completely frustrated with Peterson, but she's also dealing with her own challenges. Her husband is seriously ill, requiring frequent medical trips to Los Angeles. Peterson knows this and has positioned himself as indispensable. Every time Rodriguez tries to address his management issues, something critical comes up that only Peterson can handle. It's masterful manipulation. Sarah set down her fork. Admiral, I appreciate your honesty, but I need to know, why are you telling me all this? You could have left these problems for me to discover on my own. Brennan met her eyes directly. Because I failed to fix them, and that failure has been eating at me for 2 years. I'm retiring in a week, and I don't want to leave this base without at least giving my successor the tools to succeed where I couldn't. You're young, brilliant, and you have support in Washington that I never had. If anyone can clean this up, it's you. What happened to the people who filed complaints against Rivera? Brennan's expression darkened. Most of them requested transfers. 2 left the military altogether. 1, a young corpsman named Daniel Torres, tried to push his complaint up the chain. He was suddenly transferred to a remote installation in Alaska within 3 weeks. The message was clear. Don't challenge the system. Sarah felt anger building in her chest, but she kept her voice level. That's not a military base. That's a protection racket. Welcome to the reality of institutional politics, Brennan said quietly. The military is supposed to be different, better. But wherever humans gather, power structures form, and not all of them are healthy. Your challenge will be dismantling the bad ones without destroying the good people caught in the middle. They ate in silence for a few moments, both lost in thought. Finally, Sarah spoke. I gave Rivera a chance to reform. Was that a mistake? Brennan considered the question carefully. Tactically, it was brilliant. You demonstrated mercy and belief in redemption, which will earn you respect from the ranks. You also put him on notice publicly, which limits his ability to retaliate. And you've set up a formal review process that will be on the record. If he fails to reform, you have clear grounds for action. If he does reform, you've turned a problem into a success story. No, I don't think it was a mistake. But Sarah heard the unspoken qualification in his tone. But Peterson will see it as a challenge. He protected Rivera for years, and now you've exposed that protection as inadequate. Peterson will interpret your mercy as weakness or naivety. He'll test you, probably soon. Let him. Sarah's voice was steel. I didn't come here to make friends with people who abuse their authority. I came here to lead sailors and ensure this base operates with integrity. Brennan smiled for the first time since they started discussing Peterson. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Now let me tell you about the allies you have on this base, because you're going to need them. For the next hour, Brennan walked Sarah through the base's personnel structure, identifying officers who could be trusted, enlisted leaders who had influence with their people, and civilian employees who knew where the real problems existed. He explained the informal power networks, the historical grievances between different divisions, and the ongoing tensions about modernization versus tradition. Sarah absorbed every detail, asking sharp questions and taking mental notes. By the time they finished dinner, she had a comprehensive map of the human terrain she would be navigating. It was more complex than any strategic plan she had studied in Washington, because it involved emotions, loyalties, fears, and ambitions that couldn't be reduced to bullets on a briefing slide. As they prepared to leave, Brennan pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is a personal letter I've written to you. It contains information I can't say officially, observations I've made, and recommendations for how to handle certain situations. Read it privately, don't share it, and please, destroy it after you've memorized the contents. Sarah took the envelope, feeling its weight. Why all the secrecy? Because some of what I'm telling you could be used against me if it got out. I'm naming names, describing incidents, and making accusations I could never prove in a formal setting. If Peterson knew I was giving you this information, he could make my last week here miserable and potentially damage my retirement. I'm trusting you with this because I believe you'll use it wisely. You have my word, Sarah said seriously. And Admiral, thank you. For your honesty, for your service, and for caring enough about this base to help me, even at personal risk. Brennan stood and offered his hand. Make it count, Sarah. These sailors deserve better than what we've given them. Show them what real leadership looks like. Sarah drove back to her temporary quarters near the base, her mind churning with everything she had learned. The envelope sat on the passenger seat like a live grenade. She understood now that her encounter with Sergeant Rivera that morning was just the visible symptom of a deeper institutional problem. The real battle would be with Commander Peterson and the power structure that protected people like him. Once in her quarters, a simple but comfortable apartment, Sarah made herself coffee and opened Brennan's letter. It was 10 pages long, handwritten, and devastating in its detail. Brennan had documented patterns of misconduct, abuse of authority, and systematic protection of bad actors across multiple divisions. Peterson's name appeared repeatedly, but so did others. Captain Edward Mills in training operations, Lieutenant Commander Susan Park in personnel, Senior Chief Marcus Wade in the aviation unit. Each entry included specific incidents, dates, and names of people who had been harmed. Brennan had clearly been compiling this information for years, waiting for the right moment to pass it along. Sarah felt the weight of that trust settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about fixing a few bad apples. This was about transforming an entire organizational culture. She read through the letter 3 times, memorizing names, dates, and patterns. Then, as Brennan had requested, she burned it in her kitchen sink, watching the pages turn to ash. The information was now locked in her memory, where no one could access it without her permission. Sarah spent the rest of the night planning her strategy. She couldn't move against everyone at once. That would create chaos and make her look like a tyrant. But she also couldn't move too slowly, or the problems would continue to fester and harm more people. She needed to be strategic, surgical, and absolutely certain of her facts before taking action. Her first priority would be establishing credibility with the base personnel. They needed to see that she was fair, competent, and genuinely interested in their welfare. The incident with Rivera had given her a good start, but she needed to build on that foundation. She decided to spend her first 2 weeks in command doing surprise inspections, eating in the enlisted dining facilities, and attending training sessions without announcement. She would be visible, accessible, and most importantly, she would listen. Her second priority would be gathering evidence. Brennan had given her a roadmap, but she needed to verify everything independently. That meant building relationships with people who had been harmed or who had witnessed misconduct. It meant reviewing years of records, looking for patterns in transfers, complaints, and efficiency reports. It meant creating a network of trusted allies who could provide information without fear of retaliation. Her third priority would be protecting the people who came forward. Sarah had heard about Corpsman Torres being shipped to Alaska, and she was determined that wouldn't happen to anyone else. She needed to establish clear channels for reporting misconduct and make it abundantly clear that retaliation would result in immediate and severe consequences. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn and went for a run around the base perimeter. The early morning air was cool and fresh, and she used the time to clear her mind. As she ran, she saw the base coming to life. Sailors heading to morning shifts, maintenance crews preparing for the day's work, officers arriving at their desks. She thought about each of those people as individuals with hopes, fears, families, and dreams. They had chosen to serve their country, and they deserved leaders who would honor that choice by creating an environment of respect, fairness, and opportunity. That was the promise she made to herself as she finished her run. Every decision she made would be guided by that principle. Back in her quarters, Sarah showered and put on her uniform for the first time since arriving at San Diego. The combination of her rank insignia, ribbons, and the crisp navy cloth transformed her appearance. Yesterday, she had been anonymous. Today, she would begin the formal process of assuming command. Her schedule was packed with meetings. First was a breakfast with the senior officers where she would be formally introduced to the leadership team. Then individual meetings with each division head. In the afternoon, a tour of critical facilities with full honors and protocol. In the evening, a reception where she would meet junior officers and senior enlisted personnel. The breakfast was held in the Officers' Club, the elegant space with wood paneling and portraits of distinguished naval leaders from decades past. When Sarah entered, every officer in the room stood at attention. She quickly moved through the formalities, asking everyone to sit and eat. She observed carefully as Admiral Brennan made introductions. Captain Rodriguez looked tired, the strain of her husband's illness evident in her eyes. Commander Peterson was smooth and charming, offering congratulations and expressing eagerness to work with the new admiral. Lieutenant Commander Park from personnel was nervous and awkward. Senior Chief Wade was confident to the point of arrogance. Sarah was cordial to everyone but committed to no one. She answered questions about her background and her vision for the base in general terms, revealing nothing of her true intentions. Peterson asked about her thoughts on efficiency measures, clearly fishing for information about whether she planned to investigate his operations. Sarah simply said she looked forward to learning about all aspects of base operations and would form her opinions after thorough review. The individual meetings throughout the day gave her more detailed insights. Captain Rodriguez was indeed competent and frustrated, grateful to have someone who might actually address the problems she had been battling. Commander Peterson was slick, his presentation polished and his data impressive. But Sarah noticed small inconsistencies in his reports, nothing major but enough to raise questions. She made a note to dig deeper into his supply chain operations. Lieutenant Commander Park was a surprise. During their private meeting, she broke down crying, apologizing profusely and explaining that she had been pressured by Peterson to bury certain complaints. She had documentation hidden at home, copies of reports that had mysteriously disappeared from official files. Sarah listened with compassion but also with strategic interest. Park could be a valuable ally if she could be protected and supported. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked gently. Park wiped her eyes. "Because I'm tired of being complicit in hurting people. Because I have a daughter, and I want her to grow up in a world where doing the right thing matters, and because Admiral Brennan told me you might be different." "Admiral Brennan spoke to you about this?" "Last week. He said the new commander might actually care about fixing things. He suggested I trust you." Park looked at Sarah with desperate hope. "Can I trust you, Admiral?" Sarah thought about her answer carefully. "Lieutenant Commander, I can't promise that this will be easy or that there won't be consequences for coming forward. But I can promise you this. I will do everything in my power to protect people who tell the truth and to hold accountable those who abuse their authority. If you're willing to provide that documentation and to testify if necessary, I will ensure you are treated fairly." Park nodded slowly. "I'll bring everything to your office tomorrow morning. Early, before anyone else arrives. Make it 05:30. Come to the side entrance where I met Sergeant Rivera. I'll be there." The tour of facilities in the afternoon was exhausting but informative. Sarah insisted on seeing not just the showcase areas but also the spaces where problems existed. A maintenance yard with outdated equipment, a barracks with plumbing issues that had been reported months ago, a training facility that lacked basic safety equipment. At each stop, she asked direct questions and got honest answers once the personnel realized she genuinely wanted to know about problems, not just hear that everything was perfect. By the end of the day, she had a list of 17 immediate issues that needed addressing and dozens more that required longer-term solutions. The evening reception was more political. Junior officers networked and positioned themselves for career advancement. Senior enlisted personnel evaluated the new admiral, trying to determine whether she would support the troops or just parrot the party line. Sarah moved through the crowd, shaking hands, remembering names, and listening more than she talked. Sergeant Rivera was there, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. He approached Sarah with obvious reluctance. "Admiral, I wanted to apologize again for yesterday." Sarah studied him carefully. "Sergeant, I don't need another apology. I need to see change. Are you prepared to show me that on Wednesday?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been working on it constantly. I've also reached out to some of the people I've treated poorly to apologize directly." "That's a good start. Keep going." As Rivera walked away, Sarah felt someone watching her. She turned to find Commander Peterson standing nearby, a champagne glass in his hand and an unreadable expression on his face. "Quite a moment of theater yesterday," Peterson said casually. "The whole base is talking about the Admiral who champions the little guy." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "It wasn't theater, Commander. It was simply responding appropriately to a situation that required intervention. Of course, I'm sure you'll find there are many such situations on a base this size. I hope you won't let isolated incidents distract you from the broader mission." The words were polite, but the message was clear. Don't dig too deep or you'll create problems for yourself. Sarah smiled coldly. "I appreciate your concern, Commander, but I'm quite capable of maintaining focus on both specific problems and strategic objectives. In fact, I find that addressing the small issues often reveals important patterns about larger challenges." Peterson's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes. "I look forward to working with you, Admiral." "As do I, Commander. I'm particularly interested in learning about your supply chain operations. I understand you've achieved impressive efficiency numbers." "Happy to brief you anytime. My door's always open." "Excellent. Let's schedule something for next week. I want to see not just the reports, but the actual operations. Ground-level observations, not just executive summaries." For just a moment, Peterson's composure cracked. Then he recovered smoothly. "Of course, Admiral. I'll have my aide coordinate with yours." As Peterson moved away, Sarah felt the first real surge of satisfaction since arriving at the base. She had just fired the opening shot in what would be a long campaign, and Peterson knew it. The question now was how he would respond and whether she could move fast enough to protect the people who were helping her before Peterson could silence them. Sarah stayed at the reception for another hour, cementing relationships and gathering intelligence. By the time she left, she had a clearer picture of the base's social dynamics and had identified at least 6 more people who might be willing to provide information about misconduct if approached correctly. Back in her quarters late that night, Sarah reviewed her notes and planned the next day's activities. Tomorrow morning, she would meet with Lieutenant Commander Park and review the hidden documentation. Then, she would begin the formal process of investigating the supply chain issues. She would also reach out to Captain Rodriguez to offer support and to begin building a coalition of honest officers. The battle for the soul of Naval Base San Diego had begun. Sarah had the authority, the intelligence, and the determination to win. But she also knew that Peterson and his allies wouldn't surrender their power without a fight. The coming weeks would test everything she had learned in her career about leadership, strategy, and the courage to do what was right even when the cost was high. As she finally turned off the lights and tried to sleep, Sarah thought about all the young sailors on this base who were counting on their leaders to protect them and create an environment where they could serve with dignity. She had promised herself on that morning run that every decision would honor their service. She intended to keep that promise, no matter what it cost her. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, but Sarah was already awake. She had spent most of the night reviewing everything she knew about Commander Peterson's operations, preparing questions, and thinking through the various ways her investigation might unfold. The meeting with Lieutenant Commander Park in an hour would either provide the breakthrough she needed or confirm that Peterson had successfully buried all evidence of his misconduct. Sarah dressed in her working uniform and made strong coffee. The base was quiet at this hour, just a skeleton crew manning essential posts. She liked the stillness, the sense that the day held infinite possibilities before the complications and conflicts began. She arrived at the side entrance where she had confronted Sergeant Rivera at 5:15, well before the scheduled meeting. Lieutenant Commander Park arrived exactly at 5:30, carrying a large briefcase and looking exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept much either. Sarah ushered her into a small conference room that she had reserved under the pretense of early morning planning sessions. "Thank you for coming, Commander," Sarah said, locking the door behind them. "I know this took courage." Park set the briefcase on the table with shaking hands. "I've been carrying this weight for 2 years. I'm not sure if I feel brave or just desperate. Why don't you walk me through what you have?" Park opened the briefcase and pulled out folders organized by date and type of incident. "I've kept copies of everything that disappeared from official channels. Complaint forms that were never processed, investigation reports that were filed but then mysteriously lost, personnel transfer requests that were denied or expedited based on who was complaining about whom." Sarah began reviewing the documents systematically. The pattern was exactly as Brennan had described, but even more extensive. Peterson had created a comprehensive system for protecting his favored personnel while punishing anyone who challenged his authority. Rivera's misconduct was documented in 12 separate complaints over 3 years. Every single one had been reviewed by Park's office and then disappeared before reaching higher command. "How did Peterson make them disappear?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes he did it himself. He has access codes to most administrative systems, but usually he had someone else do it for him. Captain Mills in training operations, Senior Chief Wade, even a civilian contractor named Robert Kellerman who manages the base's electronic record system. They're all part of his network." "And no one ever questioned why so many documents were going missing?" Park's voice was bitter. "People questioned it. I questioned it. But questioning leads nowhere when the person you're questioning has powerful friends. I filed a report about the missing documents last year. Within a week, my performance evaluation suddenly showed deficiencies that had never been mentioned before. I was told that if I valued my career, I should focus on doing my job correctly instead of creating problems." Sarah felt cold anger settling in her chest. "Who told you that?" "Commander Peterson himself. He invited me to lunch, very friendly, very concerned about my career. He explained that sometimes good people make mistakes by not understanding the bigger picture. He said that every complaint has 2 sides, and sometimes protecting the mission means not letting disgruntled individuals derail good officers. Then he suggested that my promotion to commander would be much easier if I demonstrated better judgment. That's textbook intimidation. Yes, ma'am. And it worked. I backed down. I stopped fighting. I became complicit in protecting people who were hurting others. Park's voice cracked. I have to live with that. Sarah reached across the table and put her hand on Park's shoulder. You're here now. That takes strength. And with this documentation, we can finally hold people accountable. But I need you to understand something. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Peterson will fight back. He may try to discredit you, to claim you're unstable or vindictive. Can you handle that? Park took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. My father was a Navy SEAL. He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being terrified. I'm terrified, Admiral, but I'm also done being silent. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. For the next hour, Sarah laid out her strategy. They would document everything in multiple secure locations. They would identify other potential witnesses and approach them carefully. They would build an airtight case before making any accusations. And most importantly, they would protect everyone involved until they were ready to act decisively. Sarah also made it clear that she would take personal responsibility for the investigation. If it went wrong, if there was political blowback, it would fall on her, not on Park or any other witnesses. That was her obligation as the commanding officer. By 7 o'clock, they had organized all the documentation and created a plan for the next phase of the investigation. Park left through a different exit than she had entered, and Sarah stayed behind to secure the documents in a safe that only she could access. The official change of command ceremony was scheduled for the following Wednesday, which gave Sarah 5 days to work quietly before assuming full authority. She used that time strategically, conducting surprise inspections, reviewing personnel files, and most importantly, talking to sailors at every level about their experiences on the base. On Tuesday morning, Sarah visited the supply warehouse at 6 a.m. without announcement. She found the facility in chaos. Equipment was scattered haphazardly. Requisition forms were piled up waiting for processing, and the staff looked exhausted and frustrated. The chief petty officer in charge, a woman named Chief Ramirez, looked startled when Sarah walked in. Admiral, we weren't expecting you. That's the point, Chief. Tell me what's really going on here. Ramirez hesitated, clearly torn between honesty and self-preservation. Sarah waited patiently, letting the silence encourage candor. Finally, Ramirez spoke. Ma'am, we can't keep up with the demands. We're short-staffed because 3 of our best people were transferred out suddenly last month. The requisition system that Commander Peterson implemented last year requires 17 separate approval stages, which creates massive delays. And we keep getting contradictory guidance about priorities. Show me. Ramirez pulled up the computer system and walked Sarah through the requisition process. It was deliberately Byzantine, designed to create confusion and delay rather than efficiency. Simple requests that should take hours were taking weeks. Critical supplies were stuck in bureaucratic limbo, while non-essential items moved through quickly. Who decides which items get priority? Sarah asked. Commander Peterson personally approves anything over $500, and lately, he's been reclassifying items to require his approval, even when they're under that threshold. Why would he do that? Ramirez chose her words carefully. I can't say for certain, ma'am, but I can tell you that the units who have the least problems getting supplies are the ones whose commanders don't make waves about other issues. There it was. Peterson was using control over supplies as leverage to maintain his power structure. Units that complained about misconduct or challenged his authority found their requisitions delayed or denied. Units that stayed quiet got what they needed quickly. It was corruption disguised as efficiency. Sarah spent 2 hours at the warehouse, reviewing records and talking to staff. By the time she left, she had a comprehensive understanding of how Peterson's system worked and dozens of specific examples of how it had harmed operations. She also had the beginning of a solution in mind. That afternoon, Sarah met privately with Captain Rodriguez. She laid out everything she had discovered and asked for Rodriguez's support in the investigation. Rodriguez was initially hesitant, worried about the political fallout, and concerned about protecting her career given her family situation. I understand your concerns, Sarah said. But I have to ask you, how many more people need to be hurt before we act? How many more good sailors need to request transfers or leave the military because they can't get justice? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her own folder of documents. I've been keeping records too. I couldn't act on them alone, but with your authority and support, maybe we finally have a chance. The conspiracy was wider than Sarah had initially realized. Rodriguez had documented connections between Peterson and several officers who ran lucrative side businesses providing services to the base: equipment rental companies, consulting services, training contractors. The same pattern appeared repeatedly. Companies owned by friends or relatives of Peterson's allies received preferential treatment in contract awards, while legitimate competitors were systematically excluded. It wasn't just about protecting bad behavior anymore. There appeared to be actual financial corruption involved, which elevated the stakes considerably. This would require not just administrative action, but potentially criminal investigation and prosecution. We need to involve the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, Sarah said. This is beyond my authority to handle internally. Rodriguez nodded. I've been saying that for a year, but every time I tried to escalate, I was blocked. Peterson has friends in high places who shut down inquiries before they start. He doesn't have friends higher than me, Sarah said quietly. I've been authorized to clean up this base by people who know there are systemic problems. If Peterson wants to play political games, he's going to discover that he picked the wrong opponent. The next day, Wednesday, was the formal change of command ceremony. The base parade ground was immaculate, with thousands of sailors in dress uniforms standing in perfect formation. Distinguished guests sat under a canopy protected from the bright California sun. A Navy band played patriotic music. Sarah stood beside Admiral Brennan as the ceremony progressed through its traditional elements: speeches praising Brennan's service, the reading of orders, the symbolic transfer of command authority, and finally, Sarah's acceptance speech. She had prepared carefully, knowing that every word would be analyzed and remembered. She needed to establish her vision while also sending clear messages to both her allies and her adversaries. Today I accept the honor and responsibility of commanding this great naval base, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the parade ground. I do so with profound respect for the sailors who serve here, for their families who support them, and for the mission we all share, defending our nation and upholding the values that make us worthy of that trust. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled personnel. I believe that trust is earned through action, not words, through integrity, not convenience, through courage, not comfort. In the coming months, you will see me not just in formal settings like this, but in every corner of this base. I will listen to your concerns. I will address problems directly, and I will hold everyone, including myself, accountable to the highest standards of conduct and performance. Sarah saw Commander Peterson in the front row of officers, his expression carefully neutral. She directed her next words partly at him. There will be changes. Some will be uncomfortable, some will be difficult. But all will be guided by a simple principle. Every person who serves in uniform deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Every sailor deserves leaders who put the mission and the welfare of their people above personal ambition or political convenience. That is my commitment to you, and I will keep it regardless of cost or consequence. The speech continued for another 10 minutes, outlining her priorities and vision. When she finished, the applause was enthusiastic from the enlisted ranks and more measured from some of the senior officers. Sarah noticed that Captain Rodriguez was clapping vigorously, while Commander Peterson's applause was perfunctory at best. After the ceremony, there was a reception where Sarah greeted hundreds of people. Sergeant Rivera approached, looking nervous but determined. Admiral, I have that report you requested. Follow me. Sarah led him to a quiet office and closed the door. Rivera handed her a thick folder containing his self-assessment, documentation of complaints filed against him, and a comprehensive plan for changing his leadership approach. Sarah read through it carefully while Rivera stood at attention. The document was impressive. Rivera had clearly taken the assignment seriously. He acknowledged specific instances where he had abused his authority, offered genuine apologies, and outlined concrete steps he would take to rebuild trust. He had enrolled in anger management counseling. He had requested assignment to additional leadership training. He had personally apologized to 8 people he had mistreated, including Petty Officer Hayes. "This is good work, Sergeant," Sarah said finally. "But words on paper don't mean much without sustained change in behavior. Here's what's going to happen. You're going on 6 months probation. During that time, you'll report directly to me monthly on your progress. You'll continue counseling and training, and you'll maintain perfect conduct. Any hint of backsliding, and you're gone. Clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet. Prove you deserve it." Dismissed. After Rivera left, Sarah sat alone in the office, thinking about the path ahead. She had enough evidence now to move against Peterson and his network. The question was timing and strategy. If she moved too quickly, Peterson might be able to mobilize his allies and fight back effectively. If she waited too long, more people would be harmed. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. area code. Rear Admiral Mitchell. "Admiral, this is Vice Admiral Patricia Keene from the Inspector General's office. Do you have a secure line where we can talk?" Sarah's heart rate increased. "Give me 5 minutes." She moved to the command center's secure communications room and called back on an encrypted line. "Admiral Keene, this is Mitchell on a secure line." "Good. Admiral, I'm calling because we've received information about your base that requires immediate attention. Multiple sources have reported potential financial irregularities and abuse of authority. I understand you've been conducting your own inquiry." Sarah chose her words carefully. "I've been gathering information as part of my normal assumption of command duties. There are certainly issues that concern me. I'm sending a team from NCIS to San Diego tomorrow. I need you to provide them with full access to your findings. This investigation is now a priority for the Department of the Navy." "Understood, ma'am. Should I inform my personnel that NCIS will be arriving?" "Negative. The element of surprise is critical. Brief only those individuals who need to know for operational security. And Admiral, be careful. The people you're investigating have powerful connections. They've already made calls trying to shut this down. Those calls are being ignored, but it tells you the level of influence they have." "I understand the risks, ma'am." "I hope you do. You're doing the right thing, but doing the right thing doesn't always protect you from consequences. Watch your back." The call ended, leaving Sarah with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The investigation was now official and had support from the highest levels. But Keene's warning was clear. Peterson and his allies would fight back hard. Sarah spent the rest of the day preparing for the NCIS team's arrival. She secured all the documentation in the command safe. She briefed Lieutenant Commander Park and Captain Rodriguez on what was coming. And she made sure that the witnesses they had identified were protected and aware that they might be called to provide formal statements. That evening, Sarah received a visitor at her quarters. Commander Peterson stood at her door, his expression troubled. "Admiral, may I speak with you privately?" Sarah considered sending him away, but decided to hear what he had to say. She invited him in, but left the door open and kept their conversation in the living room, where they could be seen from outside. "What can I do for you, Commander?" Peterson sat on the edge of a chair, his usual confidence noticeably absent. "Admiral, I've heard rumors that there's an investigation. I want you to know that I've always tried to run my operations with integrity. If there have been problems, they're the result of honest mistakes or misunderstandings, not misconduct. Commander, if you're here to try to influence an official investigation, I should warn you that would be a serious error. No, ma'am. I'm here to ask for fairness. I've served this Navy for 22 years. My record speaks for itself. I hope that you'll consider that record before making judgments based on complaints from disgruntled personnel who didn't get what they wanted." Sarah studied him carefully. Peterson was trying to get ahead of the investigation, to frame himself as a victim of false accusations before the evidence came out. It was a defensive move, and it told her that he knew his network was collapsing. "Commander, I will be fair. Fair means conducting a thorough investigation, considering all evidence, and allowing everyone involved to present their side. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about. If you have made mistakes, as you suggest, now would be the time to be forthcoming about them." Peterson's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Admiral, you've been here less than a week. You don't understand the complexities of running a base this size. Things that look improper to an outsider may actually be necessary adaptations to get the mission accomplished. Thank you for that perspective, Commander. I'll keep it in mind as I review the facts. Was there anything else? Peterson stood, realizing he wasn't going to get the assurances he wanted. Just one thing, ma'am. I have friends in this Navy, people who know me, who trust me. If you try to destroy my career based on unsubstantiated accusations, you'll find that you've made powerful enemies. Sarah stood as well, her expression cold. Commander, that sounds remarkably like a threat. I'll give you the benefit of assuming you misspoke in the heat of emotion. But let me be absolutely clear. I don't make decisions based on who has powerful friends. I make decisions based on facts, regulations, and what's right. If you've conducted yourself properly, you have nothing to fear from that standard. If you haven't, then no amount of powerful friends will protect you. We're done here. Peterson left without saluting, a deliberate sign of disrespect that Sarah noted but chose not to address immediately. She had bigger battles ahead. The NCIS team arrived the next morning in unmarked vehicles. Led by Special Agent Marcus Chen, they were professional, thorough, and clearly had been briefed on the sensitivity of the situation. Sarah provided them with everything she had gathered, introduced them to Lieutenant Commander Park and Captain Rodriguez, and gave them access to base records. Over the next week, the investigation expanded rapidly. Agents interviewed dozens of witnesses. They reviewed years of financial records. They discovered bank accounts, shell companies, and a pattern of kickbacks that stretched back 5 years. Peterson had been skimming money from contracts, accepting bribes from vendors, and using his position to enrich himself and his associates. But the financial crimes, while serious, weren't what bothered Sarah most. It was the human cost. The investigation revealed 17 sailors who had been driven out of the military or transferred punitively for challenging Peterson's authority. Dozens more who had suffered in silence, afraid to speak up because they saw what happened to those who did. On Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the change of command ceremony, Special Agent Chen requested a meeting with Sarah. Admiral, we're ready to make arrests. Tomorrow morning, we'll be taking Commander Peterson, Captain Mills, Senior Chief Wade, and 3 others into custody. I wanted to give you advance notice so you can prepare for the fallout. Sarah nodded. What about Robert Kellerman, the civilian contractor? Already in custody. We arrested him this morning on federal charges. He's cooperating, providing details about the electronic records manipulation. Good. What do you need from me? Just your continued support. This is going to get ugly. Peterson's lawyers will make a lot of noise. There will be media attention. Some people will claim this is a witch hunt or that you're settling personal scores. You need to be prepared for that. I'm prepared, Agent Chen. Just make sure the case is solid. It's solid, Admiral. We have documents, testimony, electronic evidence, financial records, and cooperating witnesses. Peterson is going to prison. The arrest happened at dawn on Saturday. Sarah insisted on being present when they took Peterson into custody at his base housing. She wanted him to see her face, to know that his power was broken not by political maneuvering but by simple accountability. Peterson didn't go quietly. He shouted about injustice, about betrayal, about how Sarah had been on base less than a month and was destroying good officers. But as the agents led him away in handcuffs, Sarah saw something else in his eyes. The realization that he had finally faced someone who couldn't be intimidated or corrupted. The base went into shock. Rumors flew wildly. Some people claimed Sarah was a tyrant, destroying careers to establish her authority. Others praised her courage in taking on a corrupt system. The truth, as always, was more complicated than either narrative. Sarah held an all-hands meeting on Monday morning. Thousands of sailors packed the base theater to hear her explain what had happened. I know you have questions, she began. I know some of you are worried, angry, or confused. I'm going to be as transparent as I can while respecting the legal process. Last week, NCIS arrested several individuals on charges of financial crimes, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. These are serious charges based on extensive evidence. The accused will have their day in court and are presumed innocent until proven guilty. But I also want to address the broader issue. What happened here didn't happen overnight. It was a pattern of behavior that developed over years, enabled by people who looked the other way because it was easier than standing up for what was right. That includes some of you. It includes some of the leadership who came before me. And if I'm honest, it might have included me too if I had been here and faced the same pressures. The point isn't to assign blame to everyone. The point is to change the culture going forward. Starting today, this space operates on different principles. Integrity matters. People matter. Doing what's right matters more than protecting your career or avoiding conflict. If you witness misconduct, you report it. If you experience abuse, you speak up. And I promise you this, if you come forward with truth, I will protect you. There will be no more retaliation, no more punishing people for having courage. But I also need you to understand that change is hard. Some of you will be uncomfortable. Some will disagree with my decisions. That's okay. I don't need everyone to like me. I need everyone to trust that they're being treated fairly and that their leaders are acting with integrity. We have work to do. We have a mission to accomplish. And we have sailors who depend on us to create an environment where they can serve with pride. That's what I'm committed to, and I hope you'll join me in that commitment. The response was mixed but mostly positive. Sarah spent the rest of the week meeting with units, addressing concerns, and beginning the process of rebuilding trust. Lieutenant Commander Park was promoted to full commander and given responsibility for reforming the personnel complaint system. Captain Rodriguez was given additional support for her division and relieved of some administrative burdens so she could focus on her family. Chief Ramirez was promoted and put in charge of overhauling the supply requisition system. And Sergeant Rivera, to his credit, continued his rehabilitation. 6 months later, he completed his probation with flying colors, having become one of the base's most effective mentors for young sergeants learning proper leadership techniques. He would never forget the day he shoved a woman in civilian clothes and discovered she was an admiral. But more importantly, he never forgot the second chance she gave him. The trials took months. Commander Peterson was ultimately convicted on 14 counts of fraud, bribery, and abuse of authority. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and dishonorably discharged. Captain Mills and Senior Chief Wade received lesser sentences but also lost their careers. The civilian contractor, Robert Kellerman, cooperated with prosecutors and received a reduced sentence. But the legal proceedings were almost beside the point. What mattered more was the cultural transformation that began that morning when Sarah decided to walk the base without fanfare, to observe without announcement, and to intervene when she witnessed injustice. 2 years later, Naval Base San Diego had the highest retention rates in the Pacific Fleet. Morale surveys showed dramatic improvements. Efficiency metrics were up across the board. And most importantly, sailors reported feeling respected, valued, and supported by their leadership. Sarah was promoted to Vice Admiral and given responsibility for an entire battle group. On her last day at the base, thousands of sailors lined the streets to see her off. Among them was Petty Officer Hayes, now promoted twice and thriving in her career. Commander Park, who had found her courage and her voice. Chief Ramirez, who had transformed the supply system. And Sergeant Rivera, who had learned that true strength comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. As Sarah drove away from the base for the last time, she thought about that rainy morning when a sergeant had shoved her roughly and then turned pale after learning who she was. That single moment had set in motion events that changed hundreds of lives. Not because she was powerful or vindictive, but because she refused to accept that rank should determine how people are treated. The lesson was simple but profound. Leadership isn't about title or authority. It's about character, integrity, and the courage to do what's right even when the cost is high. Sarah had learned that lesson long ago, but that morning in the rain had reminded her why it mattered and why she had dedicated her life to service. Some stories end with dramatic victories or clear resolutions. This one ended with something more important. A base full of sailors who went to work each day knowing they would be treated with dignity, who trusted their leaders to support them, and who understood that speaking truth was rewarded rather than punished. That was the real victory. Not the arrests or the headlines or the career advancement. The real victory was measured in the quiet confidence of young sailors who could focus on their jobs instead of avoiding abusive leaders. It was measured in the complaints that were now handled promptly and fairly. It was measured in the families who didn't have to worry about their loved ones suffering in silence. Sarah Mitchell had come to Naval Base San Diego as a newly appointed admiral with impressive credentials and important connections. She left as a leader who had proven that principles mattered more than politics, that people mattered more than power, and that the true measure of command was not in grand ceremonies but in the daily dignity of those who served. And somewhere, on a rainy morning in memory, a sergeant learned that the woman he had shoved roughly deserved his respect not because she was an admiral, but because she was a human being. That lesson, multiplied across an entire base, across an entire military, across an entire nation, was what made the difference between institutions that served their people and institutions that exploited them. The story of what happened at Naval Base, San Diego, became part of military lore, told to new officers as an example of leadership done right. But for those who lived through it, it was more than a story. It was a transformation, a reminder that one person with courage and integrity could change an entire organization. Sarah's legacy wasn't measured in medals or promotions. It was measured in the careers she saved, the culture she transformed, and the reminder that authority without accountability is tyranny, but authority wielded with integrity is the foundation of justice. The rain that fell on that first morning had washed away more than dust. It had washed away the illusion that rank meant the right to abuse, that power meant freedom from consequences, that position meant protection from truth. What remained was something stronger, a community bound by mutual respect, united by shared purpose, and led by people who remembered that service means exactly that, serving others rather than using them. And that, in the end, was a story worth telling.